It was a cold, windy night on January 18th, 2025. The kind of night where sound carries through the snow and the mountain feels larger than anything around it. Under dim light, Kerstin Gurtner and her partner Thomas Plamberger made their way up Grossglockner, Austria's highest peak. They were only a few hundred feet from the summit when their climb quietly came to a stop. In the darkness, the mountain stood still, but something had already gone terribly wrong. Hours later, only one of them would return to the valley below. What began as a winter ascent meant to be remembered slowly unfolded into one of the most unsettling tragedies in recent Austrian mountaineering. This is the story of Kerstin and Thomas and their first and last attempt together to reach the roof of Austria. Austria sits in the heart of Central Europe, bordered by Germany, Italy, Switzerland, and several other countries. It's a place where clean cities and quiet villages sit comfortably between long stretches of farmland and where the landscape rises slowly into some of the most dramatic mountains on the continent. A large part of the country is shaped by the Alps, long ridgelines of rock and ice, deep valleys, glaciers, and peaks that have drawn climbers, hikers, and skiers for generations. In winter, much of Austria looks almost frozen in time. Lakes sealed under sheets of ice, forests covered in white and sharp summits disappearing into passing clouds. The air gets thinner, the days shorter, and the mountains take on a quieter, heavier presence. At lower elevations, life continues calmly. Historic towns still follow old routines, farms that have stayed in the same families for generations remain scattered across wide valleys, and cities like Vienna balance modern life with centuries of history layered into their streets. Austria is often seen as calm, orderly, and incredibly beautiful. But the same mountains that give the country its postcard image are also powerful, unpredictable, and unforgiving, especially in winter. They attract people because of their beauty, but that beauty can turn harsh very quickly. And it's one of those mountains, high above the quiet villages and valley roads, where this story begins. Grossglockner stands in the eastern part of the Alps, rising to 3,700 meters or about 12,400 feet, the highest point in all of Austria. Even though it isn't as tall as some of the giants in France, Italy, or Switzerland, it has become the kind of milestone mountain. A place where hikers take their first steps into true mountaineering and where people begin to test themselves at higher altitudes. Part of Grossglockner's appeal is that reaching it is surprisingly easy, unlike remote peaks where climbers must travel for days on foot just to reach the base. Grossglockner sits close to main roads. There are established viewpoints, visitor centers, and routes that let people stand near the mountain without needing any technical skills at all. For many, this accessibility becomes the first encouragement to go a little farther, from hiking trails to climbing routes, from valley walks to glacial slopes. Over the decades, climbers have carved well-established routes up the mountain. Some are straightforward for trained beginners, and others involve exposed ridges and technical moves. Grossglockner has a reputation for being friendly to newcomers, but that reputation can be misleading. The mountain may look welcoming, but it carries the same dangers that taller, more intimidating peaks do. Weather can shift suddenly, winds can rise without warning, and familiar paths can turn into icy, hazardous slopes in just minutes. The air thins as you climb, and even experienced mountaineers feel the effort. Still, thousands reach the summit every year. With the right gear, proper preparation, and a cautious approach, the climb is achievable, and the reward is remarkable. On a clear day, standing at the top of Grossglockner feels like standing above the whole country. The view stretches in every direction, a sea of alpine peaks fading into the horizon. The world below looks small, quiet, and distant. It was this exact experience, the promise of standing on Austria's highest point, the quiet beauty of the winter mountains, and the sense of accomplishment that comes with reaching a place so few people ever see, that drew Kerstin Gurtner and Thomas Plamberger to the mountain that night. They wanted to stand on the summit together. 33-year-old Kerstin Gurtner was an adventurous woman who had loved the outdoors for as long as anyone around her could remember. Friends describe her as the kind of person who never stayed indoors for too long, someone who found peace in the cold air of the mountains, who felt at home on forest trails, and who used every free day she had to look for the next ridge, the next small summit, or the next quiet valley to wander into. She called herself a winter child, and in a way, it fit her perfectly. Snow, cold, and high places didn't push her away. They pulled her in. Mountains weren't a backdrop for her, they were part of her life. Her boyfriend, 39-year-old Thomas Plamberger, shared the same connection with the outdoors. He was older, more experienced, and had spent years climbing in the Alps. Thomas had summited multiple peaks across Austria and neighboring countries, including Grossglockner itself. To the people who knew him, he wasn't just someone who liked to hike. He was a capable mountaineer, comfortable with ropes, ice, altitude, and the long hours that serious climbs often require. At some point during their relationship, Thomas proposed an idea. They should climb Grossglockner together. For him, it would be a return to a mountain he already knew. For Kerstin, it would be her very first high-altitude climb. The thought excited her. She knew Grossglockner was Austria's highest mountain, a peak she had admired from a distance for years, and now she had the chance to reach the summit with someone who had already stood there. Thomas took full responsibility for planning the climb. Since he had experience and Kerstin didn't, he would act as her guide. Friends later said he spent weeks preparing her, explaining what gear to bring, what to wear, and how to move on steeper ground, and what to expect once the air thinned and the temperature dropped. This wasn't just another one-day hike. For Kerstin, this was something entirely new, and she trusted Thomas to lead the way. Their goal was to summit Grossglockner on January 18, 2025. When the day finally arrived, both of them were excited. Kerstin knew the climb would be harder than anything she had done before, but she was ready for it. High-altitude climbing on Grossglockner doesn't require oxygen masks the way Himalayan peaks do. The air is thinner, yes, but still manageable for climbers in good condition. Thousands reach the summit each year, but what often surprises new climbers is not the height, it's the conditions. In the winter, Grossglockner becomes a different mountain entirely. There are 5 main routes to the summit. 4 of them are considered challenging or technical, involving exposed ridges, ice, and terrain where ropes and experience are essential. The only route meant for beginners and guided tours is the Adler's Ruhr route, the normal route which passes by the Erzherzog Johann hut. It's longer but safer. If the goal is to bring someone new to the mountain, especially in winter, this is usually the route guides take. But Kerstin and Thomas didn't take that path. Instead, they chose the Studelgrat route, one of the more difficult ways up Grossglockner. It's a beautiful ridge, but also exposed, narrow, and demanding, especially in the cold and dark. No one knows exactly why they chose it, but many believe Thomas felt confident guiding Kerstin through a route he already knew well. A typical ascent of Grossglockner is a 2-day trip. Climbers begin by reaching the Erzherzog Johann hut on the first day, a 7-hour climb, and the rest there before attempting the summit the next morning. But because Studelgrat approaches the mountain from a different direction, they wouldn't pass the hut at all. Their climb would be a single long push, something only experienced climbers normally attempt, especially in winter. Their plan was simple on paper: climb on Studelgrat in one long day, reach the summit before dark, and then descend the easier Adler's Ruhr route and pass by the hut on the way down. They intended to start early, around 4 a.m., but instead they began 2 hours late. Even so, they continued their ascent. The morning went smoothly. Kerstin enjoyed the climb, taking in the vast views opening around them as daylight spread across the mountain. The first several hours were calm and quiet. At 1:30 p.m., they reached a popular resting spot known as the breakfast spot. There, they paused, drank water, and ate. They had already climbed for hours, but the summit was still far away. Daylight was beginning to fade, and winter days in the Alps are short. Even so, they pushed higher. By 10:30 p.m., everything had changed. Weather near the summit deteriorated fast. Temperatures dropped to around -20 Celsius or -4 Fahrenheit. Winds reached 70 kilometers per hour or 45 miles per hour. In those conditions, the mountains become a different world. Even strong climbers begin to slow down. The cold drains energy, frostbite becomes a real concern, and visibility drops. The couple stopped just 50 meters, about 150 feet, below the summit. They were incredibly close, but a combination of darkness, wind, and cold forced them to take shelter on the exposed ridge. Around this time, a webcam pointed toward the summit captured their headlamp lights. People watching the feed noticed movement on the ridge, something unusual for that late hour. Concerned, they alerted rescue authorities. A helicopter was dispatched to check on the climbers. When the helicopter hovered above them, Thomas made no attempt to signal distress. He didn't wave, flash his headlamp, or try to get the crew's attention. From above, the couple appeared stable enough. Rescuers even managed to contact Thomas by phone, but what he communicated wasn't publicly known at that time. Whatever he said, it didn't trigger an immediate rescue. Moments later, the helicopter turned away and disappeared into the night sky, leaving the couple alone on the mountain. Ever since the helicopter left, the mountain grew quiet again. The wind continued to sweep across the ridge, and the couple made no attempt to climb the last few meters to the summit or begin their descent down the easier route. In the darkness, nothing moved except the shifting snow around them. Whatever sense of progress or momentum they had carried through the day had faded, replaced with stillness. Moments after the helicopter disappeared into the night, Kerstin began to deteriorate. The hours of climbing, the thin air, and the unrelenting cold had finally caught up with her. She started showing early signs of hypothermia, exhaustion, confusion, and slow loss of coordination that creeps in without warning. Her movements became hesitant, her responses slower. It's believed that even when the helicopter first flew overhead, she was already slipping into the early stages of hypothermia, a point where intervention is critical. That moment, when help was directly above them, may have been the window where a call for assistance could have made a difference. But Thomas did not contact rescuers until 1:35 a.m. During that call, he alerted authorities about Kerstin's condition. Yet, immediately after making that call, he allegedly placed his phone on silent and put it away. Rescuers attempt to reach him multiple times afterward, but every call went unanswered. On a winter mountain at night, communication is often the most vital tool a climber has, and theirs had fallen silent. What's even more troubling was not just the delayed call, but the decisions made in those dark hours. Thomas had brought an emergency blanket and a bivouac sack, essential tools designed to protect a hypothermic climber from losing more body heat. But instead of using them to shelter Kerstin where she lay, he chose not to. He reportedly told her he would descend alone to look for help, leaving her on the exposed ridge less than 50 meters from the summit. The webcam overlooking the mountain captured the moment this decision unfolded. In the grainy night images, a single headlamp can be seen moving away from the summit area, Thomas, while another faint light remained still near the top. That was Kerstin. It wasn't until 3:30 a.m. that Thomas made a second call to rescuers, informing them again of the situation. Another helicopter was dispatched, but strong winds pushed the aircraft back, preventing it from reaching the summit. Ground teams were then sent, climbing through the night in freezing temperatures and forceful winds. By the time rescuers reached the upper ridge, it was shortly after 10 a.m. They found Kerstin near the summit, lifeless. Hypothermia had set in long before they arrived. Thomas, on the other hand, had survived with cold exposure, exhaustion, and was visibly shaken. Immediately after he was brought down, police questioned him about the sequence of events. A formal investigation began, examining the route, timeline, and communication records. Authorities later discovered that Thomas had indeed silenced his phone after the 1:35 a.m. call. Over the following months, investigators reviewed every detail, the delayed calls, the unused emergency gear, the decision to descend alone, and the inconsistencies in Thomas's statements. By December 2025, investigators concluded that Thomas had abandoned a hypothermic climber, failed to call for help promptly, and did not use the equipment that might have protected her. He was formally charged with manslaughter by gross negligence, with a trial scheduled for February 2026. If convicted, he could face up to 3 years in jail. Thomas was supposed to be the guy that day, the person with more experience, the one who understood the risk of high-altitude winter climbing, and the one who knew Grossglockner well enough to lead someone else up its slopes. More importantly, he was the person Kerstin loved, someone she trusted, someone she believed would keep her safe when the mountain grew colder, darker, and more difficult. On that ridge, in the hours where she needed help the most, that trust was broken. Kerstin had always loved the outdoors, especially the mountains. She wasn't chasing fame or danger, she simply wanted to experience a place she had admired her entire life. Grossglockner was meant to be a milestone for her, a memory she would carry with her for years. But instead, it became the place where everything stopped. She had so much more she wanted to do, more trails to explore, more peaks to climb, and more ordinary days to live. All of that ended in the moment when the person she relied on chose to walk away into the darkness. The mountain didn't take her life on its own. It was the absence of the person she trusted most. A couple's love is meant to keep each other warm, but on that cold January night, that warmth was missing. And for Kerstin, it turned tragically, unforgivingly cold.